February mornings in Georgia can feel deceptive. The cold isn't sharp like up north. It's damp, quiet, and heavy, clinging to skin and streets alike. Milton, a suburb known for its manicured neighborhoods, tree-lined roads, and sense of safety, was still asleep when Nathan Murray Smith stepped outside. 6 a.m. is a strange hour. Too early for the day, too late for the night. It's when joggers haven't yet appeared and commuters are still minutes away from starting engines. It's when the world holds its breath. Nathan walked out barefoot. That detail would echo louder with every passing day. Bare feet on cold pavement. No phone. No wallet. No keys. No shoes waiting by the door. No car leaving the driveway. Just a young man moving toward an intersection and then, nothing. How do you reconstruct intent from absence? Was this a decision or a moment? Was he thinking clearly, or not thinking at all? Parents of missing children often say the same thing. You don't realize how many assumptions you make about safety until those assumptions collapse. You assume your adult child will always have a phone. You assume they'll call if something's wrong. You assume independence equals protection. And then one morning proves you wrong. The call no parent is ready for. The call likely didn't come with drama. Law enforcement rarely delivers news the way television does. It would have been calm, measured, procedural. Your son hasn't returned. We're concerned. We're asking for your help. But calm words don't soften impact. For Jonathan Smith, Lil Jon to the world, the roles reversed instantly. The man known for commanding crowds, shaping culture, and projecting energy became what he had always been beneath the persona: a father. No amount of fame prepares you for that phone call. No success shields you from fear. And fear, once introduced, does not leave quietly. When fame complicates grief, fame has a strange relationship with crisis. It amplifies concern, but it also distorts it. Within hours, Nathan's disappearance was no longer just a family emergency. It was public knowledge. Alerts circulated. News anchors repeated his name. Online commenters speculated in real time. But for the Smith family, none of that answered the only question that mattered. Where is Nathan? There is a unique cruelty in having your worst moment become content. Even when coverage is respectful, even when intentions are good, every retelling reinforces the uncertainty. People magazine's photo of father and son wasn't intrusive, but it was powerful. A reminder that behind the headline was a relationship, a lifetime of moments no audience had seen. What memories does a parent cling to in moments like this? The last conversation? The last laugh? The last time everything felt normal? Silence as survival. The family's request for privacy wasn't strategic. It was necessary. Silence, in these situations, is often mistaken for avoidance. But silence can be an act of preservation. When answers don't exist, speaking can feel like betrayal, to truth, to hope, or to your own emotional limits. Lil Jon said nothing publicly. That absence spoke volumes. In a culture that expects instant statements, emotional transparency, and performative vulnerability, choosing restraint can feel almost radical. But what is there to say when you don't know if your child is safe? What words could possibly be enough? The internet's unfamiliar role: respect. Something unusual happened as the story spread online. People paused. Yes, there were theories, there always are. But many platforms showed restraint. Commentary channels read from official reports. They emphasized welfare, not drama. They avoided speculation. Boss Talk TV's moment was particularly haunting. A recorded interview featuring Nathan aired just hours before news of his disappearance broke. His voice, relaxed, reflective, grounded, suddenly took on new weight. He talked about his father as Dad. About normal life. About tea, movies, and home. That's the part that unsettled people most. How does someone sound so present and then vanish? How does a voice shift from interview to alert overnight? Nathan Smith. A life in progress. To reduce Nathan to Lil Jon's son is to miss the point entirely. Nathan Murray Smith was building something of his own. From a young age, music wasn't just background noise, It was language. His childhood wasn't spent chasing fame. It was spent observing craft. Studios weren't playgrounds. They were classrooms. Still, the expectations were enormous. Being the child of a cultural icon comes with invisible pressure. Every achievement is questioned. Every failure is magnified. Every choice is interpreted through legacy. And yet, Nathan carved his own lane. He learned the technical side of music, the unglamorous work behind the scenes. Production, engineering, sound design. He didn't rely on his last name. He relied on skill. Under DJ Young Slade, he earned credibility quietly. Education mattered to him. Training mattered. Process mattered. NYU wasn't a vanity choice. It was commitment. By his mid-20s, his resume spoke for itself. Collaborations weren't favors. They were earned. Festival slots weren't inherited. They were booked. So when people ask, why would someone like that disappear? They're really asking something deeper. Can success coexist with internal struggle? Can forward momentum hide fractures? Can someone be doing everything right and still feel lost? Mental health without a script. Authorities were clear. This was a welfare concern. That framing matters more than many realize. Mental health crises don't always look like breakdowns. Sometimes they look like quiet decisions made in moments no one witnesses. Sometimes they look like walking out the door without shoes. Disorientation doesn't always mean chaos. Sometimes it means clarity that doesn't align with reality. And mental health does not discriminate. It doesn't care about family support. It doesn't care about resources. It doesn't care about talent. What if Nathan wasn't running from something, but towards silence? What if the absence wasn't escape, but confusion? These questions don't accuse. They seek understanding. The search. Hope measured in miles. Police searched nearby parks, trails, waterways. Each location represented both hope and dread. Every step forward carried the possibility of answers, or confirmation of loss. Search efforts are emotionally brutal not because of what they find, but because of what they might. For families, waiting becomes a full-time existence. Phones become lifelines. Sleep becomes optional. Time loses structure. And the world keeps moving anyway. How do you exist inside uncertainty when everyone else expects updates? The Opps narrative, and why it falls apart. The word Opps entered conversations not because of evidence, but because of habit. Hip-hop culture has trained audiences to look for conflict, to assume rivalry, to expect retaliation. But narratives built on reflex rarely hold up under scrutiny. There is no evidence, none, that Nathan was involved in any feud, conflict, or industry tension. His work was collaborative, not confrontational. His presence was creative, not combative. Dragging past industry disputes into this moment says more about cultural conditioning than reality. Lil Jon's history is well documented. Yes, there were rivalries. Yes, there were disputes. That's true of nearly every artist who shaped an era. But to project that history onto a disappearance without facts isn't just inaccurate, it's harmful. Because it distracts from the real issue. A human being is missing. A family is waiting. And speculation does not bring answers. Power isn't loud. Lil Jon built a career on volume, sonic, cultural, visual. But this moment revealed another kind of power. The power to say nothing. The power to protect your family. The power to resist narrative hijacking. In a media environment that rewards reaction, restraint becomes a statement. And maybe that's the lesson here. Not every story needs a villain. Not every mystery has a twist. Not every silence hides something sinister. Sometimes silence is just pain without language. The question that won't go away. As of the last confirmed update, Nathan had not been publicly located. No resolution. No closure. Only hope held carefully, deliberately, because to drop it would mean something unbearable. And that leaves us with the question that started it all. What goes through a parent's mind when their adult child walks out the door and never comes back? Is it guilt? Is it memory? Is it love stretched to its limits? Maybe it's all of it at once. And maybe the most important thing the public can do isn't speculate, analyze, or narrate, but pause. Because behind every missing person alert is a family living inside a question mark. And some questions deserve patience more than answers. It was nothing dramatic, just a phone, face down on a scatter of receipts and a glass with the faint fingerprint ring of someone who'd been in a hurry. The playlist was open to a file Nathan had been curating for months. Mixes that moved from old-school crunk into ambient tracks he was experimenting with, a soft through line that suggested he was thinking about something, or someone, or a change. The title read only, For Home. Lil Jon found it like that at dawn, the house still warm from the night before, the baby monitor showing a sleeping daughter in grainy grayscale, the kettle on the stove cooling. He was the kind of man whose mornings had once started with the roar of stadiums and smoke machines. Now his mornings began with stretches, a protein shake, and 10 minutes of meditation. That day, meditation came and went. He sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through Nathan's messages until his eyes blurred. There was nothing that suggested a plan. Nothing that suggested goodbye. He called Nathan's phone. Straight to voicemail. He texted. No reply. He called his manager, who texted back the single, useless instruction to breathe. By midday, the calls from friends had multiplied into a chorus of confusion. By evening, there were too many voices in the house. His sister pacing, his wife whispering prayers, a publicist pacing too, trying to turn panic into a statement. What does it feel like to wait for someone who might be inside your house? What does it feel like to imagine your child walking around a corner and knowing, with a small, selfish certainty you can only feel at home, that everything will be okay? Those were questions that had no answer. Police came the next morning. They were kind. They were methodical. They took statements, checked surveillance cameras from nearby intersections, spoke to friends and colleagues. They treated it as a welfare check, not a criminal investigation. No signs of foul play, one detective told them, but the phrase meant little and everything at once. It sounded like certainty couched in hedging language, the bureaucratic version of not wanting to take hope away. Outside the house, the neighborhood began to watch. Lawn chairs populated porches. People walked dogs slowly past the gate and slowed even more as if proximity itself might reveal something. The local deli owner brought sandwiches. Neighbors left votive candles, handwritten notes. A woman in a hoodie left a single vinyl record at the mailbox, a small object that seemed, in some way, to make sense. Why do we perform rituals when language fails? Why do candles and playlists and old vinyl feel like answers when the truth is silence? The story on the internet took a different shape. Facts are easy to compile into the skeleton of a narrative. Meaning requires care. The skeleton was quick to assemble. A famous father, a missing child who was also an artist, a community waiting. The meaning was slower, more textured, and it was not what people wanted to consume. They wanted villains, motives, confirmed leads. Instead they got a lack of evidence and a raw, leaky human heart. People began to fill the gaps in predictable ways. They pointed to everything rap culture had taught them to expect about violence and consequence. They scrolled through Nathan's old sets, dissected his last tweet, leaned into rumor. The rumor machine is less about truth than narrative economy. It tells you who to fear, why, and how to react. It reduces ambiguity to a caricature of certainty. But Nathan had been, in every available account, a man who moved toward creation, not conflict. He spoke softly in interviews. He laughed often. He curated samples late into the night. He had an eye for textures in music and a fondness for obscure foreign records. When a producer friend described his studio space to a reporter, they said it looked like a treasure chest. Stacks of vinyl, pinned-up flyers from underground shows, a well-worn pair of headphones with the ear cups scuffed from midnight practice. Where did a treasure chest go when someone walked away from it? Lil Jon walked the house like a man counting blessings he could not see. He noticed small things. The place Nathan left his sunglasses, a half-drunk cup of cold coffee in the studio, the dent in the couch from where Nathan fell asleep mid-session. Memory became a new kind of evidence for him, each object a tiny anchor. He remembered Nathan Small, kneeling beside him during a tour, asking about drum patterns. He remembered Nathan at 6, hands sticky from candy, insisting he wanted to be a DJ. He remembered the first time Nathan played a track at a family barbecue and the way the backyard filled with people, their bodies moving before any of them knew the name of the song. When fame is a family inheritance, what does privacy look like? What does ownership of grief mean when grief is public property? Those questions crawled at Lil Jon's insides. He had spent decades performing an exaggerated masculinity, a loud voice, an unflappable persona. The industry rewarded that constancy. But he had also quietly been breaking it down. Visiting therapists, committing to treatment for a liver that he once neglected, opening up about therapy on radio shows that had once only wanted him to shout. When Nathan was born, in 1998, a detail he both cherished and protected. Lil Jon had told interviewers that fatherhood had softened him in ways that could not be advertised. Now that softness looked like fragility. Friends gathered in shifts. Some were famous, some were not. A young rapper who had risen through the same Atlanta circuits showed up at the door with coffee and a hug. An old collaborator sat on the back steps and smoked, his silence a kind of prayer. Nathan's DJ friends held impromptu sessions in basements and parks, spinning tributes and posting timestamps that read like little beacons. Play this at 2 a.m. in case he's listening somewhere. Musicians know how to make absence tolerable with sound. They turned the city into a low, mournful hum. What does it do to a community when its rituals are turned inward? When grief is not a moment but a season? Lil Jon started leaving the house at odd hours to walk the neighborhoods Nathan used to drive through, to sit in coffee shops where Nathan once scribbled beat ideas. He would sometimes stand in front of warehouses where the DJ scene met and listen to the anonymity of the city. He would look at the CCTV cameras mounted on corners and think about how clever humans had become at watching one another. Except sometimes what we needed to see was deeper than a camera could reveal. There were cracks in the narrative of certainty that no amount of surveillance could fix. Nathan had been experimenting with changes in his life that he did not always explain. He had been candid in conversations about anxiety, the kind that lives in small panics. Sudden dizziness in crowds, a difficulty sleeping during shows, the urge to leave early and not return. He told a close friend that he sometimes felt like he was working against noise, trying to hear something pure under the clamor. He had started pairing that phrase with an old family ritual. Taking long walks by water, sitting very still, listening to the tide. Mental health is a difficult thing to make headline copy. It resists the tidy arcs our culture craves. It is not dramatic enough for some, too subtle for others. But the police's early statement that this was being handled as a welfare check forced a different frame. People began to use phrases they seldom used for familiar faces. Is he okay? Has he been sleeping? When did he last see a therapist? Why are we so reluctant to treat missing persons as mental health cases instead of immediately criminal cases? Is it because violence is thrilling and psychology is domestic? The family set up a private line for information. They asked for discretion. They asked for prayers. They asked, with a particular humility of people who know the world will not be gentle with their request, for space. They also posted a plea for anyone with information to come forward, promising anonymity. They were careful, measured. It was the only way they could be honest with the world and still protect a son who might wander into the margins for reasons none of them could name. The press tried to be respectful, but the internet's appetite is vast and ungovernable. Clips of Nathan from promotional shoots, him laughing with his father under neon lights, him in headphones concentrating, became artifacts for speculation. An out-of-context quote on a podcast looped back as evidence of despair. A journalist's offhand observation about Nathan's experimental turn became proof that he had been trying to flee. In the absence of facts, narrative creators make do. What responsibility does the public have when someone's life turns into a mystery show? How do we balance curiosity with the dignity of the living? There were small victories. A surveillance camera 3 miles away picked up a figure who resembled Nathan walking near a river trail at 3 in the morning. Someone thought they saw him at a convenience store an hour later. A man who worked nights remembered a DJ who used to stop through and always order the same sandwich. He thought he'd seen Nathan's face in the crowd a week ago. Each tip fed hope and the cruel exhaustion of false alarms. Each lead required police time, family energy, and emotional expenditure. Each non-result tilted the family further into a private weather system of waiting. In the meantime, the music community rallied in practical ways. DJs donated time and mixers. A small foundation started by Nashville producers organized a search fund to pay for private investigators and to fund awareness campaigns. People mailed playlists labeled "Come Home" and urged friends to play them at certain times in case Nathan caught wind. The gestures were earnest, small, and human. Lil Jon, who had built a career on large gestures and immediate gratification, found himself learning the mechanics of patience in ways he had never imagined. He spent entire nights in a chair by Nathan's studio, listening to tracks that now felt like eulogies and prayer. He practiced a different kind of performance. Public composure that could be maintained for long, bleeding stretches. He learned to say, over and over, "We're doing everything we can," and to mean it even when his insides felt like broken glass. When press outlets asked for interviews, he would accept or decline depending on how raw the morning felt. Sometimes he read statements written by a lawyer that were precise and flat. Other times he would speak to a microphone and let sound pour out of him, the small, messy human things reporters often try to edit away. He spoke about parenting, about second chances, about the fact that even with a life that had been loud and public, grief had been quiet and private. Is it easier to ask a stranger to help look for a lost dog than it is to ask them to help look for a lost child of a famous person? Does anonymity protect or isolate the family? There were moments that revealed new layers of complexity. Nathan had a girlfriend once, someone outside the industry, a woman who loved old books and had a laugh that cut through the noise. They had been close for a time, and then they had drifted. She came forward weeks after Nathan disappeared with a short statement. She loved him, she hoped he was safe, and she asked people not to weaponize his love life for clicks. Her courage, the simple act of asking for decency, felt radical in an age of performance. An old mentor of Nathan's also reached out publicly, recalling the nights Dylan, Nathan's nickname among friends, would show up with a bag of records and a sense of joy about sharing. He'd hand you a track like it was a secret, the mentor said. And once you heard it, you felt better. Those testimonials reframed Nathan not as a headline but as a person who had given and who had been loved for his generosity. The search broadened into small acts of communal care. Volunteers learned to canvass with tact. They left information cards at shelters and crash pads around the city. They checked with hospitals and detox centers. They used social media to circulate last-known photos and to collate tips, trying to marshal the chaotic power of the internet toward useful ends rather than rumor. This is part of what changes when private pain becomes public. A civic apparatus forms around a human need. It can be clumsy and invasive, but it can also yield new kinds of solidarity. A local church hosted a vigil where 100 people, some who knew him and many who did not, lit candles and sang halfway remembered hymns until the sound blurred into something like prayer. Did communal grief bring more healing, or did it make the wound more visible? Can there be a difference when strangers hold you up because they want you to stand? Lil Jon began to write. Not press statements, but letters. Some were to Nathan, some were to himself. Some were to the strangers who had become unpaid archivists of their family's feelings. He wrote about the first time he'd taught Nathan a beat, about how proud he had been to find a son whose musical instincts were different from his own. He wrote about the daughter born in 2024, who had learned to say "de" long before she could form sentences, and who rolled over in her sleep with the elasticity of trust. He wrote about the small banalities of fatherhood that had once felt like routine and now felt like treasures. A hand on a shoulder, the smell of laundry, the way a child's laugh could shift perspective instantly. Letters are a way to resist narrative collapse. They are private acts that claim time and place and provide a continuity that public conversation cannot always supply. They are also a form of memory-making, a deliberate archivist act that asserts, this person existed in detail, this person mattered in tiny, particular ways. Days bled into weeks. The news cycle shifted, as it always does, but not in the way some feared. The story did not combust into a conspiracy. It did not turn, for the most part, into a witch hunt. That restraint mattered. It allowed the family, fragile and public, to exist without a parade of vultures. It allowed an investigation to proceed without constant, performative pressure that often sabotages real work. And yet, the itch for resolution persisted everywhere. People sent theories. They offered names and places and half-remembered connections. Some of the ideas were helpful. Others were cruel by accident, a symptom of people trying to understand tragedy and making a narrative out of loose pieces. The difference between compassionate speculation, "I saw him at the river," and cruel speculation, "This celebrity must have enemies," was not always clear to those wrapping their grief in keyboards. What does it mean when a family asks the world for quiet and the world replies with questions? How do you hold both a plea for privacy and a plea for help at the same time? In the quiet moments, Lil Jon replayed the last conversation he had with Nathan. It had been casual. They were talking about a sample Nathan wanted to flip, about a possible collaboration, about the mundane logistics of life. There was laughter. There was advice. There was nothing to read as a warning. That nagging absence of warning is its own kind of torment. People often imagine clues, a sudden bank withdrawal, an angry voicemail, as the signs that pain is possible to predict. But much of life is not preluded by a clear signature. The hardest thing to accept is that absence can be ordinary at first. A missed call here, a canceled coffee there. Then the pattern leans toward crisis and the small things pile up into a catastrophe that was never visible as it was forming. He learned to stop trying to craft a story that made neat sense. Instead, he learned to inhabit the contradiction, to say he was hopeful and frightened in the same breath, to wake each morning and carry on rituals that made it possible to breathe. The community continued to search. Private investigators traced IP addresses, checked surveillance footage beyond the city, and ran down leads that ranged from promising to ridiculous. Caseworkers checked shelters. Volunteers checked parks and river bends. Social media campaigns used paid pins and boosted posts to make sure the plea was seen by wider networks. It was, in many ways, an old-fashioned search made modern. Boots on the ground married to algorithms. And there was music. Musicians gathered to play benefit shows. DJs created sets that looped Nathan's favorite tracks. Producers released instrumental compilations titled "Come Home" and donated proceeds to search costs. It felt, in every way, like the world doing what it could in the only language so many of them spoke: sound. What does it mean to sound the world when words are inadequate? Can rhythm be a prayer? As months passed, the family shifted into a different rhythm of life that was both public and private. There were legalities to attend to, matters of estate and rights, and press statements that required formal addresses. There were also banalities: tax papers, birthday parties, the baby's first steps. Life insisted on continuing in its small, relentless way. They learned not to let the world define every memory. They learned to keep small things for themselves: a playlist hidden in a drawer, a jacket with Nathan's scent preserved in a sealed bag. They learned to laugh again in shards, moment by moment, even as the wound bled quietly. There were moments of cruelty in the public conversation. A late-night host joked about it in an attempt at edgy comedy. A columnist wrote a speculative piece that read more like a thriller outline than a humane reflection. Those moments were painful, and they revealed something necessary about our culture. We have an appetite for closure that sometimes makes us callous in its pursuit. But more often than cruelty, there was evidence of tenderness. A stranger who never met Nathan left a pair of headphones on the family's doorstep. A young fan sent a letter with a drawing. A veteran detective from another county called to offer resources. People reached into the gap and offered the simplest, purest thing they could: attention. Attention is a complicated currency. It can be exploitative and empty. It can also be the exact thing a family needs to keep a search alive. The community's attention, used well, helped coordinate volunteers, funded searches, and kept the name alive in places investigators would not otherwise have looked. Finally, after a long season of looking and hoping, there was a development that felt like both an answer and a challenge. A man in a neighboring state called in with a tip. A driver at a bus depot remembered a man matching Nathan's description paying cash for a ticket and leaving without luggage. The footage was grainy, but there was a face and a walk and a hat. It was not definitive. It was something. Police followed through. The tip required travel and patience and more human energy. It did not provide certainty. It provided motion. And sometimes, motion is the only proper response to immobilizing fear. What do you do with a lead that is ambiguous? How do you hold hope without being consumed by it? The family convened and made pragmatic decisions. They planned for both the best and the worst. They taught their daughter to ask for help when she needed it. They wrote letters they might someday deliver, depending on how the story resolved. They learned to live in a gamma space. Not quite closure, not quite surrender, a long slow state of leaning forward. They also continued to insist, publicly and privately, on a simple truth. Nathan was a person, not a plot. He had friends who remembered his jokes, lovers who remembered his hands, estranged relatives who remembered a laugh that could fill a room. All of that mattered. None of it fit neatly into a headline. None of it justified the harm of rampant speculation. In the end, the story held its original lesson like an ache. Sometimes the most important thing is what you can't confirm. Sometimes the most honest reporting is restraint. Sometimes the answer is silence because the only appropriate response is waiting. Lil Jon found that he could no longer be only the man who once screamed into microphones and lit up clubs. He was now the man who sat in a small, sunlit room when the baby napped, writing playlists and letters. He was now the man who, in interviews, asked for discretion with the weary authority of someone who has learned the price of spectacle. He still wondered endless things. He wondered whether his son's search for sound had led him somewhere quiet and safe. He wondered whether a man could get lost inside his own need for solitude and then be found only by the patient, mundane labor of people who choose to care. He wondered whether the culture of spectacle would ever cultivate the kinds of habits that preserve privacy and dignity when lives are fragile. He also began to see that uncertainty, rather than being a hole to be filled with speculation, could be a place where the community learned to be better. It offered an invitation, to choose compassion over rumor, to treat absence as a call for help and not a call for drama. It invited people to sit in discomfort rather than flee to explanations. What does it take for a culture to learn patience? To resist the easy story and prefer the messy, difficult truth? Those questions had no tidy answers. They did, however, have consequences. The way people handled Nathan's absence, the restraint of some reporters, the practical coordination of volunteers, the willingness of strangers to send small, meaningful things, became a blueprint for how the public might respond to others in the future. And until Nathan was found, the family kept living with a dual identity. In public, a household under a microscope. In private, a family trying to carry on with the tenderness and mess of ordinary life. They prayed. They hoped. They held on to the playlist on the counter and the memory of a laugh. Sometimes, when the night was very quiet, Lil Jon would go into Nathan's old studio and play a track at low volume. He would sit on the floor with his back against the console and let the music move through him like a tide. He listened for signs he could not prove, a favored rhythm, a phrase, a cadence that reminded him of the son who had once wanted to make strangers feel something with sound. And in that listening, he practiced a new kind of faith. The faith that a life is more than a headline, the faith that a missing person can be returned not by speculation but by work, attention, and the stubborn insistence that people matter even when their stories don't make sense. Until Nathan came home, that was the only story that mattered. A father waiting, a family loving, and a community learning, however haltingly, to be gentle in the face of the unknown.